We are going to begin. So just to kind of reiterate, we were in the kind of the second part of Genesis where we had talked about the patriarchs, you know, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we finished up with Jacob and Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. That's we all finished up. So the very last part of Genesis, we're going to talk about Joseph. And there's a lot of similarities between Joseph and Jesus. And so we're going to start, both were actually considered saviors of a type. So if you would turn to page 2, we're just going to read this where it says chapter 37. We're just going to read the similarities so that when we actually read chapter 37, it's some things to look at. So page 2. Everybody got that?
Yep.
Yeah, I better
Okay.
get my reading
Of
glasses.
this. No.
I know. I have another pair.
This.
No.
This.
It says
This.
37.
Well, no, that's actually the scripture.
Okay.
You want to go to the other part. We're gonna go. We're not reading yet. We're gonna go to
Yeah.
the other part first.
Here.
Okay, page 2.
You had that paper clip in there. Remember that paper clip on the top, right where it goes to start from.
Right here. Right there.
Here.
Okay.
Read it.
Okay, so in chapter 37, there are roughly 60 similarities between Joseph and Jesus. So we're going to just go through the first 16 of them, okay, that we can find in chapter 37. So, number 1, Joseph was a shepherd, and Jesus is the good shepherd. Okay, similarity number 1. Similarity number 2, Joseph was beloved of his father. He was the favorite. Jesus is beloved of his father. Number 3, Joseph lived with his father in honor before going down to Egypt. Obviously, Jesus lived with God before coming down to earth. Number 4, Joseph was hated by his brothers. Jacob's special love for him, he was very beloved, so his brothers hated him. Jesus was hated by his brothers because he claimed he was from God. He was God's son. Okay. Number 5, Joseph foretold of his future sovereignty. Jesus did the same. He basically said that he was the Son of God. Okay. Number 6, Joseph was sent by his father to his brothers for their welfare. And we'll read in this chapter about that. And Jesus was sent to the lost sheep of Israel. So he was sent as well. Number 7, Joseph's brothers plotted to kill Joseph. And the similarity with Jesus is the Jews plotted to kill Jesus. Number 8, Joseph's brothers did not believe in his dreams. And the similarity with Jesus is Jesus's brothers did not believe his words. They didn't believe he was the Son of God. Okay, so number 9, Joseph's brothers teased Joseph about being a dreamer. And the Jews teased Jesus about driving out demons in Beelzebub's name. So they just mocked him. Both were mocked. So number 10, Reuben had a plan to save Joseph. And Pilate had a plan to offer Barabbas, so he was going to put Barabbas in to save him. Okay, so Joseph was stripped of his coat, number 11, and Jesus was also stripped of his coat at the crucifixion. Number 12, his brothers, while eating, intended to slay him. And while the Jews, while eating the Passover, desired that Jesus be killed. Okay. Number 13, Joseph was sold into Egypt at the proposal of Judah. Jesus was betrayed and handed over to the Jews by Judas. Interesting. Judah and Judas, the similarity. And it was also for 20 pieces of silver, which was kind of interesting. Yeah. So we'll find all this out. There are a lot of similarities. Wow. Okay, so Joseph was taken out of the pit alive in his body. Jesus resurrected out of the tomb. Joseph was sold for the price of redemption, which was 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver. And number 16 is Joseph's blood sprinkled coat was presented to his father. And Jesus, our scapegoat, and his blood was presented to God the Father. Okay, so those are just the similarities from chapter 37 that we're gonna read. So Okay, do I have any volunteers to read chapter 37? Otherwise, I will just appoint somebody. Anybody want to start with reading 37?
Want me to read it?
Sure.
Oh, you
Okay.
Okay. Joseph's dreams. Okay, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojourn in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Joseph. Jacob, Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Joseph sold by his brothers. Now his brothers went to the pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock?" And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Datham.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Datham. Okay, hold the back. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But then Reuben heard it. He rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of the many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother, our own flesh," and his brothers listened to him. The Midianites traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and led him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to the father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without a doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Shiloh to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard.
Okie dokie. So now how we're gonna kind of do this is you can kind of keep this sheet kind of off to the side. So you got kind of three piles here. You got the one that we're reading the scriptures, and then you got this, okay, because we can refer to it, okay?
Page
So
2,
keep,
right?
yeah, so keep kind of page 2, and then we're gonna start on page 5. Okay? So, okay, so what I'm gonna do
And that sheet, yeah, on those ones,
is, I'm not sure where this is. There. Okay, this one. Okay, so page, wherever it is, 5. Page 5, okay. All right, so what we're gonna see, and I'm only gonna read the bold lines, okay, because otherwise we'll be here all night. So anyway, what we're gonna see immediately here is one of God's governing dynamics, which was, divide, separate. Those he chose, he always kind of called out and separated them. So we see this right away, that Joseph is being called by God, but what he's being pulled away from his brothers and away from the family. God is separating him. Okay, and the second thing that we're going to see, through this story, is this governing dynamic of divine providence. That it doesn't matter kind of what happens. If God wants something, it's going to happen. God will take care to make sure it happens. Okay, so as you can see, I have the numbers, in red. I have the numbers in red, which correspond to our little sheet of.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's what that's all about. So it says Joseph, the second of the last of Jacob's sons, is 17 years old. He's living in Canaan with the rest of his brothers and is a shepherd. So then you can go back and Joseph was the shepherd. See? Okay. Okay. So Jacob loved Joseph more. Loved him very much. That's kind of number 2. Okay. Most Bibles will say coat of many colors. He gave him a special coat, but it actually was a tunic, and this tunic really was a princely gown. It was to signify, it wasn't just like, hey, I'm giving you a nice coat. It was royalty. He was like kind of designating his son as a prince. That's why the brothers were so mad. It's like, hey, okay. So his brothers loathed him. They hated him. Okay, so number 4, they were both hated. Jesus was hated. Joseph was hated. Okay. Somehow Joseph was at least somewhat aloof. Like Joseph, he was a dumb kid. He was 17 years old. He's like, hey, you guys are going to bow down to me. Like to his brothers who were enraged. So he was just kind of clueless. Okay, on the top of page 6. Okay. So his brothers were kind of upset because someday they were all going to have to submit to Joseph as their master. So Joseph foretold that his position would be over them. Okay, so you can see that corresponding to number 5. All right. So in verse 9, he has another dream, and Joseph would say that his brothers would bow down to serve him, but his mother and father would do that also. Okay, and so that's kind of important. That everybody, including his parents, were going to honor him.
that was kind of.
Yeah. So now the whole family must have thought Joseph was losing it or suffering from delusions. So they called him a dreamer. So same thing, you can look at the corresponding thing. Now, if you notice, it says they refer to Joseph's mother. Now, Joseph's mother died, Rachel.
Mhm.
She died. So the other wife, Bilhah, the one that Jacob or Israel took, was not his real mother. But see, the thing with the Bible is family descriptions were very, very loose, very loose. Grandsons were called sons, cousins were called brothers. It was just, they just, it's all over. It's all over the Bible. Okay. All right. So Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers who are out pasturing the sheep. Same thing. Jesus did the same thing. It's interesting because that's what the Pharisees, and they were supposed to be. Jesus was sent out to help, Israel, and they were the Pharisees, and the teachers were supposed to be teaching. They didn't. Okay, so they had decided to kill him, the brothers. The brothers believed to some degree that the dreams of Joseph being their master was true. If they killed Joseph, then their problem was solved. So Reuben, who was the firstborn of Jacob and the son of Leah, intervened and suggested that they don't kill Joseph with their own hands, but they should throw him into a pit. Reuben's real intention was not to have Joseph die, but to come back and retrieve him after his brothers left the area. So that's where it relates to Pilate kind of not wanting, Jesus to die, saw the innocents. Okay, page 7. So these same pitiless men, these brothers, would now throw their teenage brother into an empty pit to die and then immediately sit down to have lunch while they're listening to their brother screaming in the pit. But it's just funny that here we are at the Last Supper, and the Jews are plotting to kill Jesus. So yet another similarity. Okay, and so Judah, interesting that Judah and Judas, Judah has the idea, hey, let's sell him to the Arabs for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was sold for 30. So the brothers take him out of the pit alive. And we talked about that, Jesus being taken out of the tomb. Jesus rose out of the tomb, and sold Joseph to the traders for 20 shekels of silver, which was the price for a male slave. So Reuben returns to find Joseph gone and tore his garment, which was a sign of mourning. The brothers now put blood on the royal tunic, and they had stripped off of Joseph before they threw him into the well. So we know that Jesus's coat too had blood on it, because at the crucifixion when they were flogging him, and then they put his own coat on him, so his coat also was covered in blood.
So what is when they tear their garments? I mean, it's all through the Bible.
That was just a sign of.
It's not literally tear.
I know, it's like
the coat of it.
I bet the wives were like, "What'd you do?"
I know.
Because it's like it would take a
They
lot
just
of
take them off.
effort. Exactly. But yes, it was something that they did. There's a lot of interesting idioms and things that they did back then, like putting ashes on their head or just sitting in ashes.
One of them must have owned the company that sold them. So
Yeah, so they're like exactly.
So, okay.
Okay.
Why would you tear your clothes? That's all you got.
Right. So so Jacob couldn't be comforted because he loved his boy Joseph, and he thought he was dead. So it says basically that he felt like he was going to die, that he was going to go to Sheol to be with his son. Now Sheol basically meant the grave, the place of the dead. I didn't print this out, but basically, it says Jesus descended into hell from the Apostles' Creed, and he descended into hell. We have that in the Creed, but it was really Sheol. That's what if you go back and look at the original wording, it was Sheol. It was the place of the dead, which could also be interpreted as Abraham's bosom. Like there was hell. Hell was meant for the evil spirits.
Right.
People were never supposed to go to hell. Okay, but Sheol, or they refer to it as hell, was the place of the dead, like Abraham's bosom. It's where people who died but couldn't go to heaven because Jesus hadn't come yet.
The gates were closed.
Oh yeah.
The gates were closed.
Because of Adam and Eve's sin.
Exactly.
The gates were closed.
That's right.
Exactly. So if I have further teaching on that, but we're not going to get into that tonight.
Would that be what the Catholics call purgatory?
Catholics, call that purgatory. They used to call it limbo. Abraham's bosom. There were a lot of names for it. They say that once Jesus came, he emptied, the souls of the just, that everybody who had died that was just, he emptied and took.
Like it said, even in scripture, after Jesus rose. Oh no, when he was crucified, the tombs were open and people, different saints were walking, the dead were walking around, and
Right. Okay, so page 8. All right, so in the last verse, we see Joseph arrive in Egypt and get sold to a very high Egyptian governor called Potiphar. Okay, so now we're going to switch pages again and read 38, chapter 38. Is this going a little easier for everybody with me just kind of reading just some basic highlights? Okay.
If you want, I'll just stick like a pen or something in the
Yeah.
page where we left off, so when
Okay.
you're done, you
So
can
I'm gonna
flip back to it.
If you read
Chapter
38.
you said?
Yeah, we'll stick pens or something in there so you can get them easier. So
Oh, really?
37.
I know, right?
I know,
Just don't read it.
I usually do that.
Okay.
That'll make, yeah. I'll be fine.
If you need
Okay,
to.
so we're on chapter.
No.
Why can't I find it?
Okay, go ahead. Kathy.
37, I went to 41.
It
Wait,
happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, Go in to your brother's wife, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring to your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah my son grows up, for he feared that he would die, like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah, to his sheep shears, he and his wife Hira and the Adullamite. And when Tamar was told, Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, Come, let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, What will you give me that you may come into me? He answered, I will send a young goat from the flock. And she said, If you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, What pledge shall I give you? She replied, Your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her, and he went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away. Taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood.
Wow.
More drama, I know.
I know. It's
When Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the man of the place, Where is the cult prostitute who was at Enaim at the roadside? They said, No cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also the men of the place said, No cult prostitute has been here. And Judah replied, Let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, Bring her out and let her be burned. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, By the man whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, Please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, This one came out first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out, and she said, What a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah.
The drama.
They were very fertile.
Yes.
Did you notice that?
It's like her father-in-law, and then he's like, he thinks he's a prostitute. Hey, let me come into you. It's like, okay.
It's amazing. So I know. So here we just leave off with Joseph. I mean, like, this would make a good story. We could make a good movie out of this. Anyway, so yeah, we leave off with Joseph. So we Joseph's in the pit now. He gets sold, but now we're pausing and we're looking at Judah. It's just very, very interesting. Like, Jesus came from the line of Judah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look at. Okay, we think we have crackpots in our family. I mean, like, look at his family line. But anyway, so, okay. So now we're focusing on Judah. We're on page 8. Okay, everybody got that? Page 8. Okay, so
The other way.
it was out of Judah that would the Jewish people would eventually see the Messiah, Jesus. Judah would now carry the torch as the continuing line of the covenant promise that began with Judah's great-grandfather Abraham. Judah was Jacob's 4th son and was a son of Leah, one of the 2 legal wives of Jacob. Jacob's first 4 sons were all born by Leah. Remember, we had studied that last week. Okay. So the one who perpetrated the selling of Joseph, and now in this chapter, as the one who thought he was sleeping with a temple prostitute, but instead it was his widowed daughter-in-law. We need to take notice of the state of the family of Israel and the clan of Jacob. They were not a holy bunch. So take comfort, all of us who have imperfect families. Look at Jesus's bloodline. All right. Okay.
Makes
So
you feel better.
yeah.
Yes.
But that's the interesting thing is God works through very, very imperfect people.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Look at King David and so many.
So page 8. There we go. Okay.
Where we now 5.
Okay, so now we're over here. So
So remember,
page.
when we go to flip back, stick a pen in
Pen,
that
yes.
page and
We
flip back
stick
to
a
the
pen.
other
I
one.
can't see
Here.
with these new glasses.
Okay. All right. So top.
Ends it right.
We're at the top of page 9.
9.
Okay. So Jacob has
I'm lost.
decided that Reuben, even though he was Jacob's firstborn son, would not receive the firstborn blessing because Reuben had slept with Jacob's concubine Bilhah. Remember, we heard that in the last. And then Simeon and Levi, the next 2 in line, they were deemed unworthy because they had killed. Remember, they got everybody circumcised and then murdered them all when they were in pain. Okay. So that's why Judah was next in line to be the heir of the promise,
I'm lost.
because
I'm sorry.
Reuben was, yeah. So the first 3 sons of Leah were all like bad. Okay. So it naturally seemed to follow that Judah, the 4th in line, would become the inheritor of the firstborn blessing. But Joseph, having been given the tunic of royalty and being openly favored by his father, appeared to indicate that Judah's mind that Jacob was now leaning towards letting the clan be led by Joseph. Okay. So that's kind of why Judah was like, hey, let's sell him, let's get rid of him, and let's kill him, whatever, because he was threatened by Joseph. He thought he was next in line so he was trying to get rid of him. Okay, so this was the beginning of how this rivalry between Judah and Joseph started. So for these two brothers represent the people that would eventually become the two dominant tribes of Israel. There was Judah and Ephraim. So the tribes, and Ephraim was Joseph's son. So you had the two tribes. There was a northern tribe, and then there was the southern tribe. And most of the brothers were in the southern tribe, and then there was just Judah. There was just two of them. And Benjamin, I think, that were in the northern tribe. I forget. But anyway, so it was, most of them were in the southern tribe, and then there was the northern tribe. So they basically split. Okay. Okay. So Judah had children with Canaanite women. See, that's the thing is, remember God said you are not to have, this bloodline has to be pure.
Yeah.
You cannot marry Canaanites. Remember, because Ishmael did it, and God was very, very upset every time somebody would marry,
And there's problems.
Canaanites. Okay. So Judah had children with Canaanite women, and so he was now cut off from being the line of which the promise could come through. This whole thing with Genesis is Jesus is trying, or God the Father is trying to establish a line with which his seed, with Jesus could come through, and he was trying to keep the line pure. And so it's just very, very interesting that Judah, who wanted to be that next in line, does something really, really stupid. He knows he shouldn't do this. And so he disqualifies himself, by sleeping with Canaanite women. Okay, so at the bottom of page 9, it says, as the 3 sons of Judah matured, the first son, was given a wife selected by Judah. The wife's name was Tamar. Tamar means palm tree. That's how I was named. Actually, I was named after a Mantovani concert and the Debbie Reynolds. Anyway. That song from the 60s. Anyway. But we are told that God killed because he was evil. So Tamar was now a widow. What is key here is that Tamar was childless. Okay, she was a childless widow, and more importantly, a sonless widow, because that was the thing. If you didn't have a son, you were like dirt. You were like poor. You were destined to be poor anyway. Okay, so now Onan comes along. He's the next son of Judah. Okay, so he comes and he's instructed to take Tamar as his wife. This was simply a custom of that day, and generally speaking, this was not optional. You had to take your, brother's.
It was the law.
It was the law. So the idea was that just as a female could be a substitute wife as a concubine, a baby producer, like we have with Hagar and Bilhah, the women who weren't able to bear children for her husbands. So a substitute husband could impregnate a woman whose husband had died and left her without a son. This tradition was based on the substitute husband usually being a family member, usually a brother. So in verse 9, we're told that Onan, the brother of the deceased refused to impregnate Tamar, and then God killed him because he was evil in God's eyes. So why did Onan refuse to do this? Well, because if a son was produced, it wouldn't have been his, and then he was going to be bumped from. Like, it's all about who gets the son, who gets the family line. It's all about who gets the power. So it's like, geez, if I impregnate her, then it's really my brother's son, so then he gets all the good stuff. And I'm still just the second.
Weird.
It is, I know.
His son, It's
No,
not
it
like
wouldn't
it's-
be.
I know, but I'm saying it's really not. But
In that culture,
Right.
that's what was going on. So he's like, I'm not going to do this. So basically, he did withdrawal and just spilled
Good thing
his
things
seed
change.
on the ground.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
So anyway, Onan would have received less if his deceased elder brother's family line had continued. So it's all about who gets the goods. Now, it's not that this was uncommon for family maneuvering to gain the most power and wealth when the father died, but to intentionally deny this widow a son did 2 things. It meant that her deceased husband's family line would end, which was a disaster back in those days, and then she would have no son to care for her as she grew older. This was tantamount to living in extreme poverty. So for Onan knowingly to do this was selfish and callous in the highest degree. So God basically took his life as a consequence. And so the third son Shelah matured, but Judah didn't allow him to marry Tamar. He's like, oh my gosh, I got 2 sons and God killed them. I'm not going to give him my baby,
Yeah.
you know, to marry Tamar. So he, like, once again, we just see how rotten and nasty Judah was. You know, he
Yeah.
was just not a good guy.
Yeah.
So at the bottom of the page, so Judah was doing a terrible and shameful thing by not allowing Shelah to marry Tamar. And Tamar was greatly disgraced by this, so she developed a plan. She would find a way to sleep with her father-in-law, Judah, and directly from his seed perform the all-important task of carrying on the bloodline. Understanding that Judah would never do this knowingly, she disguises herself as a prostitute. But even more, notice that she was thought to be a temple prostitute.
Oh.
That is, Canaanites had adopted prostitution as a worship practice, and was connected to the pagan temple, to the god Baal.
Baal.
Yeah, this was a duty and in many ways an honor for these women to be prostitutes for Baal, and it was considered a legitimate practice. So Judah, just unbelievably, see, that's the thing, he was an Israelite, he knew God, and yet they got prostitutes over there with their God.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So he was like, okay. So Tamar's plan works. She tricks Judah into thinking she's just a temple prostitute, purchases her favors, and so she gets pregnant. So Judah finds out that he is the father and realizes that by withholding his last son, Shelah, from Tamar, it caused her to take drastic action. Now he declares that he has done wrong, not Tamar, so he repents and she's spared. Even more, Judah says that Tamar was righteous. Now, she really wasn't righteous. What, the Bible is trying to say, like, okay, this happened, and you got to look at Tamar. I mean, that was like pretty conniving,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it saved her life. Back in those
Last
days, it's like,
resort, right.
it was a last resort. Nobody was going to help her. She would die alone and penniless, and, so she did what she had to do. But it was interesting that she kept, because of what she did, even, see how God uses things? We can major league screw up,
Yeah.
but God can take our huge mistakes and still work through it. So it was through Tamar that the line of Judah, the pure line for Jesus to come through, is kept.
So it was all in the plan, in a way, yeah.
Well, God, he worked with it. He's like,
He
all
works
right,
with
these
it, yeah,
people-
right.
This guy, like, he
Yeah, I guess that's
he
the
worked
way
with
around.
it,
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just amazing. So the thing is, Tamar was a Semite. She was a descendant of Shem. Remember way back when?
Yeah. Noah,
Shem,
yeah.
Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Shem was the righteous one.
Okay.
So she was a Shemite. She was the line, this really
good
line of
guy.
good. And so
Yeah.
she was really getting majorly screwed over. And the interesting thing, for on the top of page 12. So Judah impregnated a Semite woman, Tamar, and from that came the Semite sons would then carry on the line of promise. But since Judah is the father of Tamar's children, and since Tamar is a Semite, the children from their union would be acceptable to God. So we see the particular line of the covenant promise through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Basically, this is where the Messiah was going to come. And so it's interesting, like, when the twins are born, like she gives birth to twins once again, and the first one comes out, and the midwife ties a little cord on his, okay, there's the first one, and then he puts his hand back in, and then the other one's born. And then it was the second one that was born that God chose. See, it's just like who God chooses, and that's Perez. It was Tamar, and then Perez, that was gonna keep the line. And if you look in I think it's Matthew, when the genealogy, you'll see these names. And it's really kind of cool to see that. But, Judah, what a not nice guy he was. Not only with everything we've seen, let's see, I'll kill my brother, I'll just go with a temple prostitute, I'll do all this stuff. But then it's like, my daughter-in-law's pregnant, and I think I'm gonna burn her alive. I mean, like, horrible.
Yeah,
Horrible.
that is absolutely horrible.
And this is the line that
Yeah.
Jesus came from.
Mm-hmm.
Just amazing. So God made a way, and basically he was going to make his plan happen despite despite us, despite our sinfulness, despite our mistakes, God was going to work through it all. You know, like he wanted this to happen, and it's like, all right, this is what I got to work with. And so he just, all right. So now we're on to Genesis 39. Okay, so that's why, try to keep your pages. So we got our Genesis 39, and then we got our little sheets with the, and then those. Okay, so,
Okay, Genesis 39, Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard of an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house, and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And as he spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her. As she spoke to Joseph day by day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came into me to lie with me. I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garments by her until his master came home. She told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant who you have brought among us came into me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garments beside me and fled out of the house." As soon as his master heard these words that his wife had spoke to him, "This is the way of your servant treating me," his anger was rekindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it successful.
alrighty. Okay, now, back to this sheet, number 2.
Go back to that one.
Number 2. Barb, would you help us with, there we go. Okay, all right. Number 2. Okay, so at the bottom it says chapter 39. Okay, so we're going to continue with some of the similarities that we see between Joseph and Jesus. So in this chapter, chapter 39, we see that Joseph became a servant. Jesus was also a servant. Number 18, Joseph was a prosperous servant. Jesus was also a prosperous servant, as it says in Isaiah. 19, Joseph's master was well pleased with him. Jesus' heavenly Father was well pleased with him. Okay, top of page 3, number 20. Joseph was sorely tempted by Potiphar's wife and did not sin. Jesus was tempted, remember, went up into the mountain for 40 days, and he did not sin. 21, Joseph was falsely accused. Jesus was falsely accused. 22, Joseph attempted no defense, and Jesus gave no defense at his trials. Remember, he was like a lamb led to the slaughter. 23, Joseph was cast into prison, though he was innocent. Jesus was sentenced to death through Pilate, though Pilate found no fault in him. So he was innocent also. Remember, they threw him into prison. That was part of the whole passion and everything. Okay, 24, Joseph was jailed with prisoners. Jesus was crucified with criminals. Joseph won the respect of the chief tailor. Oh, we're going to read that in the next chapter. Jesus won the respect of the Roman centurion standing at the cross. Okay, so we're going to actually get into that in a second. All right, I got ahead of myself there. All right, so chapter 39. So now we're back to dealing with Joseph, okay? So his time in Canaan is over, and his life in Egypt begins as a servant. And Joseph, a foreigner, a Hebrew,
12.
he had such an incredible amount of authority. He became prosperous and pleased Pharaoh. Okay,
Page 12.
page 12 now.
12 of 43 on
Yeah.
top.
Actually, 12. Okay, now we're gonna do page
No, keep
13.
it.
Oh, is
No, 13 now.
I got mine.
we need to stick the, we're over here. Okay. Keep going.
Remember, you're supposed to
Keep on.
stick a pen or something
Yes.
where you left off. So
I went with
Okay, there we go.
I know.
All right, we're right here. Okay, so page 13. Okay, so even though Joseph was abandoned by his family and placed into a strange land with strange gods, the God of Israel was still with him, protecting him, controlling him, and guiding events. Bad circumstances don't always mean God has turned his back on you. So as we read, Potiphar's wife was infatuated with Joseph and constantly after him. He refuses all of her advances. So he was sinless in this, just as Jesus was sinless. Then she decides to take revenge for being scorned, so she claims that Joseph tried to rape her, tells her husband, and Joseph's thrown into prison. He is innocent and does not defend himself, but relies on God. And Joseph won the respect of the chief jailer and is made supervisor over all the prisoners. Joseph proved his trustworthiness to the very man who had locked him up, and undoubtedly all who came in contact with him. This was about to serve him well, as God was about to do something astonishing, and we're going to see God's governing dynamic, number 2, of the providence that is central in Joseph's life. So, God is guiding all this. So all these bad things are happening, but God is still guiding. He's still taking control of the situation and getting Joseph. If all these bad things weren't happening, it wouldn't have set the stage for what's going to happen next, which is going to save Israel. They're going to, so anyway, okay, now on to chapter 40.
Sounds like chomping away.
Yeah. Okay, so now we are on chapter 40. Barb, would you?
40 Genesis?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. And one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We've had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Then Joseph said to him, "This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, and formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the kindness of the land of Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating out of the basket on my head." And Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation, and the 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among the servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, and Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him.
Okay. Now we are back to page 3 of this,
Page 3.
okay, this one with the lists. Okay.
Got it.
Okay. All right, so chapter 40, now we're down to number 26 of the similarities between Joseph and Jesus. So number 26, Joseph was numbered with the transgressors. The cupbearer and the baker and the king were sent with him to prison. It was prophesied about Jesus that Jesus was also crucified with 2 thieves. So there was a similarity of Jesus being among 2
Yeah.
2 other prisoners. Okay, so number 27, Joseph was the means of blessing to one, the cupbearer, and pronounced judgment on the other. So Jesus on the cross, remember, I will be with you, will be with me in
Yep,
paradise, and the
yep,
other guy,
yep.
not so much. Okay, 28, Joseph evidenced his knowledge of the future and gave credit to God alone. Jesus did the same on earth. He knew he would tell people things.
Mhm.
We saw this all through the Gospels, that he knew things. And 29, Joseph desired to be remembered by the cupbearer. Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me." So he wanted things to be. Okay, so those are some more similarities that we learned from chapter 40. Okay, so now page 13.
Page 13.
Okay.
Okay. So about 11 years have passed since his older brothers sold Joseph into slavery. He's 28 years old now. Okay. So Joseph's sitting in prison. Pharaoh became angry with 2 high government officials, the official cupbearer and the head baker. So we're on page 14 now.
Page 14.
Page 14, okay.
Oh, there I am. Okay, got it.
Okay.
I'm all over the place too.
I know.
Oh, very disorganized I am.
And so anyway, these 2 men end up getting arrested like Joseph and are held in the house of the prison captain. So we just talked about the similarities between Jesus with the two thieves on the cross and Joseph with the two prisoners.
Yeah.
Okay. So after some time, Joseph noticed one morning that they both looked puzzled and bothered. He inquired what troubled them, and they reported they had had a dream and they couldn't understand what it meant. Joseph interprets. So Joseph had to tell the baker the bad news that on the same day that the cupbearer was going to be restored, the baker was going to lose his life. That's exactly what happened on the cross. The good thief gets to go to
Yeah.
paradise, the other not so much. Okay. So the last sentence of this chapter is kind of a sad one. Joseph, having shown kindness to the cupbearer, requested that the cupbearer might do the same for him after being restored to his position. But we are told that now that everything was back to normal for the cupbearer, he just forgets about poor Joseph. And so Joseph is still in prison for a crime he never committed. Okay? Okie dokie. Genesis 41. We've only got 3 more to go. Is this going easier for everybody other than the multitude of pages that we've got going on?
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to do this, Ann? Do you want to read?
Yeah, I'll try. Joseph interpretation interprets Pharaoh's dreams. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the wheat grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke, and he fell asleep, and dreamt a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were going on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me on the chief baker in custody of the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamt on the same night, he and I each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up of the Nile and fed in the wheat grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. But when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still as ugly and at the beginning. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk, full and good. 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty years blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be known in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will surely bring it about. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. Joseph rises to power. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. And he made him ride in his 2nd chariot. And they called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up hand or foot in the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name
Zebanath
Panah, and he gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt.
Is your throat? Do you want me to finish reading?
Yeah, my throat. I need a drink.
During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly, and he gathered up all the food of these 7 years. I lost my place. Gathered up all the food for these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, and put the food in the cities. He put in every city the food from the fields around it, and Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, and Anseth, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph called the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all of my father's house. And the name of the second was Ephraim, and God had made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. The 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine came to come, and Joseph said, there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. So Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do what he tells you to do. So when the famine had spread over the land, Joseph opened up the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt, to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. Okay, there is so much. I don't know if you're starting to pick up on similarities
Yeah,
between.
oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so now we're on to page 3 again.
Even
Oh,
like
okay, 3 now?
on verse 46, there says where Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the
Yeah.
service.
Like Jesus.
That was how
But
Jesus
Jesus
was
started
when
his
he
min-
started his ministry.
Started his
at 30
ministry.
years old.
Exactly. So,
I caught that one, yeah.
Yeah,
uh,
and that one's not in your little thing there, is it?
okay, so 41. So down to number 30. Joseph was delivered from prison by the hand of God, and so God raised Jesus from the tomb. 31. Joseph was sent as the revealer of the secrets from God. Jesus is the revealer of the truth of God. Number 32. Joseph warned of coming danger and urged Pharaoh to make preparations. Jesus warned that death did not end all and urged us to be on the watch and pray. 33, Joseph was portrayed as a wonderful counselor in giving wisdom to Pharaoh. Christ is known as the one in whom all the treasures of wisdom are. He was also called Wonderful Counselor in Isaiah. 34, Joseph's counsel commended itself to Pharaoh and his officers. Jesus' teaching was commended while he walked the earth. I mean, there was a lot. He had quite a following. 35, Joseph is exalted and set over all Egypt. Jesus is highly exalted by God and will be bowed down to by all people. 36, Joseph was invested with an insignia, ring, and gold chain, as was Christ our Lord in the book of Revelation. If you read the book of Revelation, he's got a chain of gold around his neck. So it's similar that we see that in the book of Revelation. 37, Joseph's authority and glory all will pay homage and every knee will bow. Same thing. Peter in his writings says that the lordship of Jesus Christ, and every knee will bow, like every knee in heaven, on earth, and under the earth will bow. Philippians. Okay, Joseph received from Pharaoh a new name, Savior of the world, and God gave Jesus Christ a new name. In Philippians, gave him the name above all names. We read that in Philippians, that the name of Jesus every knee will bow. Joseph was 30 years old when he began his ministry. Jesus was 30 when he began his ministry. Okay, and page 4, Joseph's exaltation was also followed by a period of famine. And with Jesus, the time of Gentiles will come to an end, and the time of Jacob's trouble will begin. And these are all prophecies in the book of Jeremiah, Daniel, and Mark that all refer to Jesus. 42, Joseph alone was seen dispersing bread to a perishing world. Jesus is the one he is the bread of life, disperses and saves. That was an obvious one as we were reading that one. Joseph became a savior to all the people. Jesus is the savior to all people. And Joseph had unlimited resources to meet the needs of all the people. And there's infinite power and riches in Jesus. And he is basically unlimited in his power to help us. So those are just some of the similarities from that chapter.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now on to page 15.
What's it?
15? 15.
Oh, 4. Genesis 4.
Genesis chapter 41, page 15.
Chapter 41.
Home stretch, guys. Okay. So we're told that at the time of Joseph, Egypt was ruled by Semites. That's descendants of Shem. Remember Shem, Japheth, and Ham, the sons of Noah, and Shem was the line of righteousness. Okay, so Egypt wasn't ruled by Egyptians at this point. They were ruled by Shemites. Okay, so this is what this kind of explains how Joseph became so powerful and how Israel was allowed to prosper and to grow and to become so big, because it wasn't run by Egyptians. It was Egypt, the person in charge, the Pharaoh, was a Shemite, was a Semite. Okay? So 2 years pass from the end of this previous chapter. Joseph is now 30 years old, and prison is still his home. Pharaoh has 2 dreams. Joseph makes it clear that these dreams are from God and informs basically what the dreams mean. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. As is God's way, he does not bring judgment without sufficient warning for all those who pay heed to him. Okay, so on to page 16. We got to set you up.
I got it. I know I'm all mixed up. I got it.
Okay,
Oh, wait, that's 17 and 18. Where's
page,
15,
top of page
16.
16. Okay.
okay?
So Joseph basically says, in a paraphrase, Pharaoh, during the next 7 years, make it a law that all through Egypt, 20% of all the produce is going to be stored for 7 years in the future, because we're going to need it for the lean times, okay? The people were not too thrilled by this ruling. How difficult to believe God instead of our eyes. You know, like right now they've got the abundance. They're seeing overflow. We've got more than we could ever possibly. And so Joseph's is like, nope, we're going to store it all. And they're like, what? We finally got all of this grain and all of this prosperous, you know, with our cattle and everything. And Joseph's like, nope, we're going to store it all. And so, you know, sometimes we, in our short-sightedness as people, as human beings, we just can't sometimes see God working through things. All right, Joseph is removed from the dungeon and anointed ruler over all of Egypt. He now has unlimited resources to help everyone. And it all happened in a day. It was like, you know, we have to sometimes think that our situations can be so bad.
Yeah.
God can fix it. Like I keep thinking of Julie
sure.
Green.
That's what she
I know.
said.
I was like,
Yep.
One day is all.
one
Yeah,
day is
one
all
day
God
one
needs.
day, right?
One day is all God needs. Okay. So a ceremony was held so that all Egypt would know that Joseph's position over them. He was esteemed as a wonderful counselor, kind of like Jesus being the wonderful counselor. As part of the ceremony, Joseph was given a new name. Joseph's name was Egyptian, meaning it was like one who was called life. Other Jewish scholars say it meant code breaker. He was also given a gold chain around his neck as a sign of his authority, and all would be subject to it. He alone would be the one to provide grain for a perishing world. So in essence, he was the savior of the people of that day.
Real quick
yeah.
comment there. Okay, he's got a chain around his neck, giving him authority. Here's a chain around my neck, giving me authority.
There you go. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mine's smaller.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
That's the chain that gives me my authority right there. It's the cross.
yep,
Exactly.
absolutely. So a name was a person's reputation. So when Joseph went from house slave to prisoner, vizier over Egypt, a new name was necessary, one which reflected his position and purpose. He was now powerful under Pharaoh and served well under him. And to seal Joseph's appointment and make it permanent, without doubt, to achieve Joseph's loyalty, Pharaoh gave to Joseph a wife, Anseth, daughter of a priest. This was no small thing. The priest was of the temple of An in the city of the sun god. But it's just amazing just how, you know, just how everything was so dark in the he was in that dungeon for years and years and years and years, and then one day he's out. Okay, so Joseph now has 2 sons by his Egyptian wife, the firstborn being Manasseh, younger one being Ephraim. The mother's nationality and genealogy was determined that of the children. So despite their Hebrew names, these 2 boys were Egyptian. Ephraim and Manasseh, these two children of Joseph, born of his Egyptian wife, they were Egyptians, they were Gentiles, which is interesting.
Yeah.
See, now we see that how God is still weaving
Us.
all of
Yeah,
this, yes, into the promise. So, well, the famine hit just as God said it would, and we're all told something here that shouldn't be overlooked, that the famine was widespread. The whole of the Middle East was affected. This next part's really important because we always wonder, how did Israel become slaves to Egypt? They remember the 400 years they were in bondage to the Egyptians, 10 Commandments, the whole movie, and okay. This is how it happened. So the people ran out of money. Then they gave up their starving cattle to Pharaoh in exchange for grain. So now they're giving away their means of support. It's when they ran out of cattle, then they gave up their land, okay? And when they had nothing else to sell, they sold themselves into bond servitude to Pharaoh. In this way, Pharaoh eventually owned all the land and all the wealth of Egypt. It also allowed him to build an enormous slave working class to construct temples, roadways, cities. God used the situation to save lives and to assure the survival of Israel, but at the price of their freedom, they were now enslaved. So that's the only way you could get your grain. You basically became a slave, but you lived.
Yeah.
So that's how it happened.
Yeah, it probably happened near more to 6 or 7 years too of the famine, 'cause
Yes.
you use the money the first couple to buy it.
Exactly,
Then
but
also probably was slavery after, right near the end probably.
the tapestry of how God wove all this puts Joseph in this position. So Joseph, being from the 12 tribes of Israel,
Yeah.
is the one that God is used through all of his sufferings
Yeah.
to be able to save all of them, but this led to them all being slaves. I mean, it's just fascinating when you see how God is just,
Leaving it.
weaving all of these details. It's just very fascinating. Okay, we are on to Genesis chapter 42. Yeah, we've only got 2 more to go. Okay, so before we get to 18, we're going to go back to reading. I know.
Which would be
Okay.
page 9.
Marianne, I'm going to toss it to you.
Okay, sure. Joseph's brothers go to Egypt. When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them. And he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." They said to him, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies."
Yeah, we are honest men, yeah.
He said to them, "No, it is the nakedness of the land that you have come to see." And they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. I can't say that word. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies, but this you shall be tested by the life of Pharaoh. You shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him buy your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. And he put them all together in custody for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of the brothers remain confined where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. Then they said to one another, in truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress was come upon us. And Reuben answered them, did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood. They did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. Then he turned away from them and wept, and he returned to them and spoke to them. And he took Simeon, I can't say, from them and bound him before his eyes. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, and to replace every man's money in his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. This was done for them. Then they loaded their donkeys with grain and departed. And as one of them opened his sack to give the donkey fodder of the lodging place, he saw his money in the mouth of his sack. He said to his brothers, my money has been put back. Here it is in the mouth of my sack. At that their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, what is this that God has done to us? When they came to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man, the Lord of the land, spoke roughly to us and took us to be spies of the land. But he said to him, we are honest men. We have never been spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is this day with a father in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, by this I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the famine of your households, and go your way. Bring your youngest brother to me. Then I shall know that you are not spies, but honest men, and I will deliver your brother to you, and you shall trade in the land. As they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin? All this has come against me. Then Reuben said to his father, kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. But he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow of Sheol.
Boy, Reuben was a piece of work, huh?
Kill my 2 sons.
Yeah, just the lack of respect for life. Okay.
That was my dad.
Jeepers. Okay. Page 4.
Page 4 of that one.
Page 4. We're just going to read a few of these. Okay. This covers chapter 42, which we just read in chapter 43. So Joseph was unknown and unrecognized by his brothers. Jesus' deity was not recognized or acknowledged by most of the Jews. Okay, number 46. Joseph, however, saw and knew his brothers. Jesus' eyes are on the Jews even today. He recognizes his Jewish people. 47. Joseph punished his brethren. Jesus is dealing harshly with the Jews in Hosea and Matthew. You can read that. Okay. 48. Joseph's 10 brothers condemned to prison and released after 3 days. Jesus is condemned and rose after 3 days. Joseph's 10 brothers felt remorse. Judas, some of the Jews felt remorse. It's just interesting that, you know, like Peter felt remorse and Judas felt remorse, but how differently they handled it. Joseph exercised righteous judgment by sparing innocent Reuben, the oldest, but took Simeon into custody until the brothers returned. Jesus will exercise righteous judgment also. He is our perfect judge who can separate the sheep from the goats. Number 51. Joseph made provision for his brothers while they were in a strange land. And God, Jesus, promised to provide for all the Jews while they are scattered throughout the earth. And there's prophecies of Jeremiah and Ezekiel. 52. Joseph fed his hungry brothers. Jesus fed the hungry masses, you know, in the feeding of the 5,000. Okay, so those are some more of those similarities. Okay, so now we're on page 18.
Right.
18. We're in the home stretch here. All right, we have now moved from Egypt and Joseph back to Canaan and Jacob. The great famine now having affected this large area. Jacob's clan is in a really bad way, and the brothers are just like standing around, you know, thumbs up their noses and whatever, just not doing anything. And these are not kids, they're adults. They're like middle-aged, okay? So although we would love to find some lovely and good things to say about Jacob's sons, the tribes of Israel, the Bible doesn't offer much good about their character that is admirable at this point. Jesus didn't choose Israel because they were great men. He chose them because he is a great God and uses ordinary people to carry out his will, as we've seen. He still makes his will work despite us and despite all of our mistakes. So Jacob orders all of them except for Benjamin to go to Egypt to buy grain. Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him because he looked Egyptian, because in Egypt, you know, the men generally had beards, and in Egypt they had the makeup, the black eye makeup, and it,
highlighter,
you know, their hair was very, very different. And the pale skin, it was just, he looked completely different, so they didn't recognize him. But Joseph recognized them right away.
That's why. Okay.
Yeah, and it also must have been at that moment, with all the preparations so carefully guided by the invisible God, that those dreams that the brothers and his own father Jacob had chastised him for were true. Could you just imagine being there, and it's like, it's all coming to pass. Like they're starting to remember the dreams, and they're starting to remember all the bad stuff that they did, and it's like, come up, it's time. So Joseph realized for the first time that divine providence had been at work all along. He now knew with certainty why God had allowed all those things to happen to him. Yet some testing was needed to see if his brothers had also been prepared by El Shaddai. It's just sometimes amazing in our own lives, you know, like all this stuff happens, and it's wonderful, and we get a glimpse and we can look back, and I was like, wow, God was at work, and that's how, you know, God took all of this bad stuff that happened to me, and look at what he did, you know, with it. So, okay, page 19. Joseph now accuses them of being spies, and they were put into prison for 3 days. At the end of the 3 days, he gives a different order. 9 brothers can go back with the grain to feed their clan, but one had to stay, Simeon. So when Joseph heard what Joseph heard, made him wait. Remember, now there's an interpreter, so Joseph looks different, and he's playing dumb. You know, he's got an interpreter, even though he understands all their Hebrew talk because he's Hebrew. So it made him weep, because it's like he's starting to see the remorse. He was hearing the remorse, like, we're getting our payback for hurting, you know, our brothers. So it was starting to affect him. Okay. So Reuben tried to absolve himself, and Joseph ordered Simeon and the second son of Jacob to be held hostage. Now Joseph really messes with their heads. He puts the monies back in their sacks, and the very first night on their way back home, they find the money, and they decided that God is giving them what they deserve for all their treachery for their life. So through this story on page 20, through this story, we see the wisdom of Reuben being denied the firstborn right. He's foolish. He's a politician.
Yeah.
and we're not gonna hear from him. I mean, like, can you imagine? It's like, well, okay, like if I do something or whatever, if I mess up here, just kill my 2 sons. I mean, like,
I
the
know.
senselessness.
I know. Who would
Like-
even think of that?
You know, but this is why, in
Yeah.
God's wisdom, he was like, nope, he's out. I don't care if he's the firstborn. He's just foolish.
Mhm.
And so we're not going to hear about Reuben anymore. He's set aside. So from this point, we're just going to hear about Judah's, voice. Okay. So this is the last chapter. We're going to do chapter 43, and then we're done for the night. So who wants to read 43? Anybody? Any takers? Any takers?
They probably
Yep.
figured too when they
Wait, I
saw the
gotta find
money back in
myself.
their sacks.
Yeah.
That now they're gonna accuse them of stealing
Exactly.
stuff. So now they're really in big trouble when
Right.
they go back because he's gonna say,
Exactly.
"You never paid me."
Okay, chapter 43.
Now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten the grain that they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go again, buy us a little food." But Judah said to him, "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.' Israel said, 'Why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother?' They replied, 'The man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our kindred, saying, Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother?' What we told him was in answer to these questions. Could we in any way know that he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" And Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. If we had not delayed, we would now have returned twice." Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be so, then do this. Take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags, and carry a present down to the man, a little balm and a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the money with you. Carry back with you the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise and go again to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved." So the men took this present, and they took double the money with them and Benjamin. They arose and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of the house, "Bring the men into the house and slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." The man did as Joseph told him and brought the men to Joseph's house. And the men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house. And they said, "Is it because of the money which was replaced in our sacks the first time that we were brought in, so that he may assault us and fall upon us to make us servants and seize our donkeys?" So they went up to the steward of Joseph's house and spoke with him at the door of the house, and said, "O my lord, we came down the first time to buy food. And when we came back to the lodging place, we opened our sacks, and there was each man's money in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it again with us, and we have brought other money down with us to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." He replied, "Peace to you, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them, and when the man had brought the men into Joseph's house and given them water, and they had washed their feet, and when he had given their donkeys fodder, they prepared the present for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present that they had with them, and bowed down to him to the ground. And he inquired about their welfare and said, Is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive? They said, Your servant our father is well, he is alive. And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's eyes, and said, Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son. Then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out. And controlling himself, he said, Serve the food. They served him by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that was an abomination to the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in amazement. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much of any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him.
Wow.
Okay, more drama. Okay, so a little time passes in this last chapter, and the famine doesn't let up. So the grain supply that they came back with the grain, and it's now exhausted. And so Jacob tells them to go back to Egypt, get more grain. Of course, Jacob is reminded by his sons that they cannot go without Benjamin. So we're on page 20. Still on page 20. Okay. But he's just very unconvinced. I mean, it's like, look at how his sons have acted. They have just been bumbling idiots. And it's like, you're going to take my baby boy.
Yeah.
So he just didn't really trust them. But then something interesting happens. Judah now speaks. He's been humbled by life. He was very humbled by his daughter-in-law, Tamar, the bold act when she kind of tricked him, but it was because he was being a jerk and put her in a very, very difficult, he did evil by her. And so he's now becoming humble and a little more wise. So basically he offers himself as the bond, in place of Benjamin. So if anything happens, I'm giving you my, which is, you can just see now the maturity, and he's growing, and it's like, okay, there's something being redeemed in Jesus's line, that he is
Change of heart.
exactly, but how now Jesus coming through this, how Judah is offering himself is that sacrifice, which is just beautiful. So Judah, by agreeing to accept all the blame if something were to happen to Benjamin, had much to lose. He too could have been disinherited. Jacob knew that too, and must have felt that if it were possible for Benjamin to be spared, Judah would do all he could humanly do to see it. Here finally was a son who could be trusted. Jacob could trust Judah in this matter. But even more, Jacob would trust God. If you noticed, we read that, he was like, well, if I'm bereaved of all my sons, I'm bereaved of all my sons. He was letting go. He was like, you know what? I just have to trust God. And it's just, so you see the growth in these men. Joseph, seeing that his brothers have returned, and with them Benjamin, so he orders a banquet to be prepared and served at noon. Page 21. It just must have been such a touching scene. Like he finally sees his little brother, and then he goes out and weeps, because, just all the emotion that he must have been welling up inside of him. So, okay, page 21. So now composed, Joseph returns and the meal is served. Now Joseph eats alone because he's like the high up guy, and the brothers eat together in a group, and the Egyptian house servants eat separately from both the brothers and Joseph, because it's well documented Egyptian custom that the head of the house never eats with the servants. But why didn't the servants eat with the Israelites? Well, it says in verse 32 that it was abhorrent for Egyptians to eat with Hebrews. They were like those sheep people.
Oh yeah.
They were those shepherd sheep people, those dirty sheep people.
Mm-hmm.
So as the brothers sat down to eat, each carefully seated by the servants in a place reserved specifically for each brother, they were all stunned to see that they had been arranged from oldest to youngest in perfect order of their birth. Benjamin was given a portion 5 times So the brothers must have been just dumbfounded. Like all of this stuff, it's starting to like, yeah, they're starting to see. So something else to note, the very first king of Israel was going to be a descendant of Benjamin. So we're leaving this chapter with a cliffhanger. More drama to come next time when we come back. But are we starting to see all the similarities between Joseph and Jesus,
Oh, yeah, big time.
and just how God was working, and even just the wisdom of Joseph by allowing, like putting his brothers to the test, because by doing that we see how Judah rose to the occasion
Yeah.
and started to accept responsibility for his bad behavior, and we start to see all of that. So
Mhm.
this has been a long one, but I just really want to finish up with Genesis so we can get on to. So we just got one more. We just have not much left to go for Genesis, and then we can start in the fall with Exodus, and that's going to be a really good study.
Just so you know, the rest of the Bible study is